The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wao by Junot Díaz comments frequently on the impacts of dictatorship on modern families and on the fantasies people create to deal with hardships. Set primarily in Paterson, New Jersey, the novel revolves around Oscar, a Dominican-American teenager, and his family who have been victims of a high-level fuku, the curse and doom of the New World that worked hand in hand with the Trujillo dictatorship. While Oscar deals with isolation, depression, rejection from women, and an extreme lack of self-confidence, his grandfather struggled to protect his family from Trujillo and therefore initiated the curse on his family for generations on. Through this connection between Oscar, his mother, and his grandfather in being terribly cursed, Díaz illustrates the prominence of fantasy, curses, and the idea of fate in Dominican society. Although Oscar did have unfortunate experiences with his social life, his cynical worldview and objectification of women demonstrate the issues of destructive Dominican masculinity. Because the men around Oscar encouraged having multiple girlfriends, and because having an attractive partner was seen as a sign of success, Oscar became obsessed with finding the perfect match, to the point where he fell in love with any pretty woman he saw. Eventually, this led to him befriending women just for the chance of dating or sex, and reinforcing the false notion that women are just sexual objects. Through Oscar's point of view, one can observe how much traditional Dominican gender roles impacted an American teen. Further, we learn of his grandfather's endeavors to hide his beautiful daughter from Trujillo, who might have been a dictator, but he was a Dominican dictator, and had hundreds of spies whose entire job was to scour the provinces for his next piece of blank. It's easy to understand just how detrimental Dominican gender roles were because of this brutal dictatorship, and how those standards contributed to Oscar's condescending perspective of women. Another theme that was incredibly prevalent in the novel was Oscar's ability to escape his troubles through storytelling and writing science fiction. Though he deals with extreme social isolation, Oscar is frequently able to run away from that by writing and consuming science fiction and fantasy, which in turn isolates him even more. It's also necessary to point out that Oscar, his mother, and his grandfather used storytelling to escape their harsh realities. Oscar wrote novels in which he depicted himself as an attractive hero who regularly saved damsels in distress. His mother dreamt of marrying someone rich and falsely believed that her neglectful boyfriend would change her life for the better. His grandfather believed that the DR would soon turn to democracy, ignoring the horrors and the permanent power structure of Trujillo's dictatorship. By showing how often the main characters ignored reality to cling on to a likely impossible fantasy, Díaz illustrates how each of their situations were so drastically impacted by the fuku and the brutal history of the DR. For my creative component, I drew a surrealist illustration that represents the theme of storytelling and dreams that was prevalent in the novel. In this one drawing, there are symbols of Oscar's, Belly's, and Abelard's strongest dreams, all drawn together in a bizarre manner to emphasize that, in the end, none of their dreams totally came true. Firstly, Oscar's biggest aspiration was basically to have a beautiful girlfriend that loved him, and her looks had to be up to his standards. So I drew a woman in a gray dress with a cloth over her head, sitting on a gray mattress. I used gray for the majority of Oscar's dream because gray often represents loneliness and depression. I also drew a cloth to hide the woman's identity because her identity really doesn't matter. As Oscar falls in love with any attractive woman, it's merely her appearance and decency that matters to him. For Belly, Oscar's mother, I drew a wedding dress and rings hanging on a dead tree, along with a large mansion to represent her dream to get married and live in a house. Throughout her narrative, Belly almost never gave up hope that the gangster would propose and buy her a house, even when she was being beaten to death in the cane field. Further, I drew the house in multiple shades of purple because purple often symbolizes royalty and luxury, something that Belly never had. Finally, Abelard was persistent in his belief that the Dominican Republic would turn to democracy soon in his life. For his dream, I drew many mysterious identical men standing together. It does look very creepy and unusual, but that's the appeal of this illustration. None of it was real for the characters of the novel. You might also notice the abundance of spirals. These spirals are natural occurring shapes that continuously extend towards infinity, and I included them in this drawing to emphasize the longevity and the tenacity of the Fuku and Oscar's family.